Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, How Leaky is Your Bucket? This webinar is brought to you by the Florida Association of Museums Foundation. And we are thankful that you're here with us today. I want to thank our partners, the Department of State, the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, Visit Florida, and our speakers, Stansbury Consulting and Gadsden Arts Center and Museum. I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, I'm Carmen Godwin. I'm the FAM Foundation Program Manager. Welcome. I also want to introduce Melinda Horton, the FAM Executive Director, to give you a welcome as well.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on our first Zoom meeting with Breakouts. I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules to join us, and we will definitely, I think, keep you interested, and Carmen can give you all kinds of housekeeping rules that we have to follow. But other than that, I just want to welcome you, tell everybody that I see on here that I know. I miss seeing all you in person, and I hope one day we'll get to see each other very soon. So thank you very much, and thank you, Alice Lee and Grace. It's amazing to have y'all on board today. Thanks.
Thanks, Melinda. I also just want to go over a few items. This webinar is being recorded. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box. We'll have a couple sessions where we'll take a break and you can ask questions, or we'll make sure to relay your questions through the chat box. Also, Grace Robinson is going to be moderating the chat box, and she has some great resources and links that she's going to provide to you. So keep an eye out for those in the chat box as well. We do have a couple other things. We have three polls that we'll ask you to participate in, and we'll give you a minute or so just to kind of answer those, and then we'll share those back out with the group. So just be aware that when those come around, that's a pretty quick turnaround. We also have breakouts, and as Melinda mentioned, this is our first time running the breakout, so please bear with us as we go through that process. If there's any technological glitches, I apologize in advance. But in those breakouts, we'll put you in groups of 3 to 4, and we'll have some discussion to help you kind of talk through some of the things that Alice Lee and Grace are going to be sharing with you today. Finally, I just want to say that we do have a survey that we're going to be sending out after the program. We'll send you an email, and it'll take a minute or less, quick questions, and we use that feedback not only to improve our programs in the future, but to understand what kinds of programs that you would benefit most from in the future. And that's how we will develop our 2021 calendar. So please fill that out for us. It'd be very helpful. Now I just want to introduce our speakers today. Alice Lee Stansbury is the president of Stansbury Consulting. She is a great resource for the FAM community. She's spoken at many of our FAM conferences and always has a great response, a wealth of knowledge. Grace Robinson is executive director of Gadsden Arts Center and Museum, and she is on our board and really a great wealth of knowledge on this topic as well, and we'll speak to how this topic came about. So Alice Lee, I'm going to pass the torch over to you if you want to share your screen at this time. Thank you.
Will do, thanks. Everybody can see that? Can everybody see? Can you see my screen, Carmen?
Mm-hmm. You're good.
Yes, I can. Sorry, okay. I was on mute.
Nobody said anything. I was like, uh-oh.
Got it.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you being here this morning, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to be working with FAM and my friend Grace Robinson. So this session, well, Grace, why don't you tell them how we came up with this session idea, because it was really your idea.
Well, I think we were talking about challenges that are particular to work in the pandemic for cultural institutions.
Mhm.
And we were talking about how donor retention has always been important, but now it's more important than ever as we go through the pandemic and a recession, and for various reasons, lower on-site and in-person participation, which makes relationship management more difficult.
Mhm.
And we identified a segment of our participant base where attrition is the greatest, and started to talk about how to deal with that. So that's
Right.
how this came about.
Right. I think Grace's comment was, well, let's talk about the leakiest part of my bucket.
Mhm.
So we're going to give you an opportunity to talk about the leakiest part of your bucket. So anyway, we're glad you're here. I'm going to keep rolling. I'd love it. I know a lot of you all know each other, but I might not know you. So it's just how, and it's also just helpful to see who's on the call. If you wouldn't mind typing your name, organization, and your favorite quarantine meal in the chat box, so that we can see who's on the call and what you're fixing. We'd love to see that. So Grace, I think you're going to monitor the chat box for me.
I am. Would you like me to read these out? I put
Yeah,
mine.
let's hear it.
My son and I, comfort food, pot pies. Okay, everybody.
There you go. I love it.
Okay, we have Jennifer de Hollander, Lake Wales History Museum, anything Mexican.
Okay, excellent. Yes, we've been a big fajita family.
Hilda Massip, History Miami Museum, favorite meal is mashed potatoes. Not a meal.
The
Brennan
dinner of champions. I love that.
Basio said, what quarantine?
What quarantine? Right. Great. Love it.
Mitchell DeRozier, Manatee Village Historical Park in Bradenton said peanut butter balls, peanut butter, dry milk, honey, and chocolate chips. That sounds really good. I was going to say chocolate and I thought that was cheating, so I might have to change mine. Mary
That's
Madsen,
awesome.
Flagler Museum, favorite meal is tacos. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Great. Mary, welcome.
Declan Sheehy, sorry if I've abused your name. Senior Advancement Officer, the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature, fish and chips. Oh, that's a good one too. Lots of comfort food here.
I love it.
Yep.
International. I love international quarantine meals, fish and chips. Terrific.
So those, I believe, are all of our responses.
Okay.
Far.
Well, thanks for sharing that, everybody. And yeah, I appreciate the recipe on the peanut butter balls. That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's keep rolling. Here's what we're going to talk about in this session, as Grace mentioned earlier. In the midst of a pandemic, if I say this once now, I feel like I say it, 100 times a day. Now more than ever, right? We have to understand why donors leave and why they stay, and just how important I think donor and member retention is. And then, as Grace said, how do you maintain relationships when you're not seeing people, when they're not coming into your facility like they once did? So those are all the things we're going to talk about. And like Carmen said, we're going to do a couple of polls and 2 breakouts so that you all have an opportunity to talk to each other. And we just really welcome your feedback and participation. And we're going to work hard to make this as interactive as possible. So let's do our first poll. As I said, we're going to ask you, how leaky is your donor retention bucket? Is it flooding? Is it overflowing? Is it moderately leaking? Is it dribbling or solid? And we also have to give a shout out to Carmen because she came up with these great categories. Good job, Carmen.
Thanks.
So let's see what we've got here. How leaky is your bucket? So far, moderately leaky. Couple more people, give everybody a chance to answer. Few more. Okay, almost at 100%.
Yeah, it looks like we're close.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now
Okay.
and share the results. There you go.
Okay, great. So 50% moderately leaky, 10% overflowing, and 30% dribbling, and only 1 person said solid. So kudos to you. Great, that's really helpful. I think most nonprofits probably their bucket is somewhat leaky, and it may be solid in some places and troublesome in other spots. So we're going to talk about that too, in terms of recognizing that there are multiple kinds of donors and different types of relationships that go along with that. So thanks for doing that, Carmen. So let's start with just a little good news, which in 2020 has been few and far between, right? But this is research done by Penelope Burke and has been affirmed over and over again that if donors trust you, they will continue to support you. And Grace, I know when you and I were talking about this session and putting it together, you made the comment that sometimes they'll do more. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I had one donor I was talking with this spring who, when this all first descended, and she said, I feel so strongly about helping. I just want to do something. What can I do? And she shared that she's going to invest more in the organizations that she already has a relationship with, that she knows and trusts will offer an impact in return for her investment, as opposed to branching out in an entirely different direction. So, and many of our donors are doing more.
Right. I think that's really interesting. And I'm hearing that and seeing that in other organizations, other types of organizations and other places as well. And there's, yeah, I think if donors, I think that's just what you just said affirms this, you know, if they trust you, they will continue to support you, which is why I've said to clients, particularly to board and board chairs who've been a little reluctant at times to fundraise during the pandemic, that you have to be asking, and you can't assume that people won't give. And you know, you got to put your mission out there and give people an opportunity to support what you're doing. So anyway, a little good news that if they trust you, they will continue to support you. So the better job you've been doing up to this point of developing and nurturing and fostering those relationships, I think the better position you will be in going forward. So let's do another quick poll here. And the question is, do you know your organization's donor retention or member retention rate? And most of what we're going to talk about today is really going to be focused on donors, but if you know your member retention rate, feel free to say yes to that. And let's just see how this turns out. Got a little bit of everything right now. I think Zoom needs to add like some Jeopardy music to the polls. Do, 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 do.
While we're doing the poll, Alice Lee, I'll say one of the other FAM board members made a great comment when we were talking about asking in a pandemic, and she said, let it be your donor's choice whether they would like to give or not now, or whether they would like to do more now or give later. It put the request out there thoughtfully and let them choose.
Absolutely. And you know what, Grace, I think that's true at any time, not just in a pandemic. I mean, it's always the donor's choice, but to not ask is basically not giving them an opportunity to give. And that's making the decision for them. Mm-hmm. So
all right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now.
Looks like we've got just about everybody. Okay. So how about that? 40% said yes. That's wonderful. And 30% said no, and 30% said you're not sure. If you want to comment in the chat box, I'd be interested for those that said yes, if that's your donor retention rate or your member retention rate. I'd be interested in knowing that. So feel free to drop that into the chat. And for a couple of you that said you don't know, I just dropped this slide in. Let me go to the next. Oops, sorry, let me go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, went too fast. Okay. How do you calculate your donor retention rate? So you look at, well, these are the donors, that were giving, that returned in year 2 versus divided by the number of people that you had the year before. So here's was just my example, the number of donors that had given as of June 2019, and then maybe you had a drop off in number of donors as of June 30, 2020. And so you divide that, and your retention rate is 60%. Did anybody comment?
We have a couple interesting comments. Hilda said that that's her member retention rate, and then Brennan shared that their donor and member retention rates are one and the same. They merged out the programs, and all who contribute are donors, and they may opt in for benefits if they choose. That's interesting.
Okay, that's a really good point. I appreciate you mentioning that the donor member retention rate could be one and the same. Okay, good point. Good point. Okay, so let's go to this. I just wanted to share. So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, my donor retention rate is 60% or 20% or 80% or whatever it is, how does that compare? So how do you know what that could really mean in comparison to your colleagues or to nonprofits around the country? So this is from the Association of Fundraising Professionals Fundraising Effectiveness Project, where they've really been tracking donor retention rate for US giving. So you see that the average is 45.5%. So there's your benchmark. If you're at 60%, you're ahead of the average. If you're at 30%, then you're pretty well below the average donor retention rate. And of course, the bottom line is this is not a good donor retention rate. What this means is every time we're out there casting out our nets and putting on, implementing strategies to attract and retain donors, we're losing over half of them. So every time you get two, you lose one. That's exhausting. And of course, it gets worse when you look at the first time donor retention rate. So again, think about all the things that you do, even during a pandemic, to be kind of casting out your nets to bring in new donors. And 80, you bring in 100 and 80 of them, casting out your nets and bring in 100 fish, and 80 of them are swimming away and never give again. So our first time donor retention rate is really, really bad. Now, the good news is that once they become a donor and we've acknowledged them and you've provided some stewardship to them and engaged them in the organization, they tend to stay. So then the retention rate shoots up to 61%. So I think what this says to me is as nonprofit professionals and as fundraisers, we're pretty good at acquisition. We're just not as good at retention. And then Grace, do you want to comment about the member retention rate?
Well, I'll just say that the donor and member retention rates can be two different things. So for us, our donor retention rate is usually between 88 and 90%, but our member retention rate in the last year or so is 75. And that was because, and we'll cover this in an article we'll talk about in a little while, we had more of a blockbuster type exhibition that drove a lot of new memberships. And then without a strong program to focus on those new members and retain them, we lost many in the next year. So that was 75%. In prior years, we'd had more of a 85 to 90% member retention rate. So if you have both programs, it's worth tracking both, because you'll see a little later how one feeds into the other.
Right.
Well,
and I think you bring up a really good point. I think in the museum world, in the FAM world, you guys are always putting on just blockbuster events and activities. And I can think of other nonprofits that do the same thing. They put on some whiz bang, fabulous, 50th anniversary gala, and they renew a lot of relationships, and they attract a lot of interest, and they get a lot of first time givers and renewers or whatever. And then you don't follow that with another big, whiz bang exhibit or anniversary gala, and then you start to lose some of those people. I think Brendan's comment here about, if you have a 50% member retention rate, within 3 to 5 years, you've basically turned your membership over completely. So in year 6, you might not have any folks who have been around and been a member for the last 5 years. So that makes it really tough to build loyalty and to build major gift donors, people that and memberships at higher levels and higher levels of engagement. If you're not keeping people interested and engaged in the organization, and every 5 years you're basically starting over. So we thought that was a really good comment to share. So here's another example. I just wanted to show you about what the impact of this donor attrition issue is. So this is based on that research that I mentioned earlier, and this is a chart that Bloomerang posted. So if you're starting out with 1,000 donors and you have that 20% attrition rate, then you see what happens, as time goes on, year 1, year 3, year 5, by year 5, you're down to 328 donors. But if your retention rate is at attrition rate, meaning folks that are leaving, is at 40%, in 5 years, you're down to 78. And if you have a 60% attrition rate, you're down to 10 in 5 years. So this is a big issue. And in fact, I think it's safe to say that in the fundraising field, and I'm setting the pandemic aside for just a minute, I think the number one issue, the number one challenge is donor retention. We're great at getting people to fall in love with our organization, but we're not great at the staying in love piece. So we're great at the romance, but then once we've gotten married, the romance cools. And so we kind of tend, I think nonprofits tend to kind of take those long-term donors and members somewhat for granted, and we're not continuing to nurture that relationship. So just to drive home that point just a little bit more, I wanted to show you an example. So, and I know these numbers are big. I think the same would be true if you dropped off a couple of numbers here. But just to give you an example, what happens when you have a 41% retention rate versus a 51% retention rate. So as time goes on, and you start out with 5,000 donors, and then you lose a huge chunk of them, and now you're down to 2,050, and then 41% of that, and 41% of that, and it just goes down and down and down. Now the good news is, as they continue to renew, there's often an increase in how much they're giving, and they bump up to the next level, or at least some of them do. So you see how that average gift amount goes up. But even with the increase in the average gift amount, you see how quickly those numbers are dropping off. And the same thing's happening on the green side of the chart with the 51% retention rate. But actually, there were year 11, 12. There were a few more years after that I didn't include in my chart. And so the difference between these two is almost $450,000. So the difference in a 10% increase in your retention rate in this example resulted in $450,000 more in revenue. And even if those numbers are smaller, a 5 to 10 to 15% increase in your retention rate can make a huge difference in the amount of revenue that it's generating, and the amount of money that you're raising, or on the membership side, the number of dollars coming in from your membership program. So when nonprofits, call the fundraising consultant and say, what do? We need to raise more money. One of the things I always look at is this issue of retention. How many donors do you have? How many donors are you keeping from year to year? Because you will raise more money if you take better care of the donors that you already have, rather than constantly casting out your nets and coming up with new strategies to get people to fall in love with you for the very first time. So are there any comments? I'd be happy to take any questions. Or Grace, anything you want to add?
I would just say
here before we keep moving.
Yeah, commonly we all, especially in small shops like ours, learn to prioritize from your top down. Your larger donors down get more of your attention, more of your time, more relationship building, and have a higher retention rate. And so typically it's the new members, it's the low amounts, the entry-level donors who are coming and going through the revolving door. But many of those may have capacity over time, and retaining those is a way better strategy than continually working on acquisition of strangers. And so part of the focus of our conversation in a little while today is strategies to also retain those new members, those entry-level donors, to get to know them better, given limited time and resources.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Grace. I mean, as the executive director, CEO, there's only so many hours in the day. And I think all nonprofits and boards as well, they're going to be focused on those, major donors, major funders, and kind of work their way kind of down the list. And it's not that you don't love those first time members and those givers, people giving at $25 and $50, $100, and the more modest gifts. Of course, you appreciate them and you want to make them feel great about their support. But sometimes, like I said, there's just not enough hours in the day. And so I think when we were talking about this session, Grace, you said that was the leakiest part of your bucket.
Well, and that's the segment that feeds your donor base. Those may be your future mid-level and major donors.
Right.
If you're not feeding your donor base, you'll start to have attrition at the mid-level and the top, if for no other reason than people passing away. So you've got to feed your donor
Right.
base.
Well, and let's face it, people that are giving, first of all, there's a lot of research that people that are philanthropic, they're giving to an average of 7 organizations. So if you think about your own giving, think about, oh, I give here and I give there and different things, and your kids' activities and grandchildren's activities and all these different things. I mean, which ones do you keep going back to? Which ones do you keep giving to? And typically it's the ones that you feel that connection. You feel like you're part of the family, that you're in touch, and you're getting some level of stewardship. So, okay, let's keep rolling. Feel free to put comments or questions in the chat. We really love to chat with you. So please chime in anytime. Again, some research from Dr. Adrienne Sargent about why donors leave. And this is, to me, this is just fascinating, first of all, to see this list. And yes, it does total over 100% because people could check more than one option. So I highlighted the ones in blue. You may be thinking, well, what do they all have in common? So as you look at them, what do they have in common?
You can do something about it.
What's that?
Those are things you can do something about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if they don't have any memory of ever supporting you, then either they never got a thank you letter, or it was a no nothing, the thank you letter didn't have any impact, or they never heard from the organization after they made their gift and got that first thank you letter. If they don't really know how their money was spent, or they felt like, well, they don't really need me as much because there's other causes that are more deserving. And so you can't do anything about the fact that someone passes away, or that they do make the decision about something more deserving, or their circumstances change and they can't give. But the overwhelming number of items on here for why donors leave are things that we can control. And so the better job we can do of making sure they know where their dollars went, and that they got a really wonderful, warm, and thoughtful thank you, and then they've heard from the organization since then, will encourage them to stay, and of course increase your donor retention rate. So on the flip side of that, well, why do donors stay? Well, first, they think the organization is effective, right? They see them accomplishing its goals and making a difference in the community. They get that timely thank you. They feel like what I was saying earlier, they feel like they're part of the family. They're part of the family, and that their support and their involvement and their contributions is really appreciated, and they know who is being helped. And so this is a great checklist, I think, to keep handy when you're thinking about, well, what is our donor stewardship program going to look like? Or if your retention rate is really low, if this is what keeps donors staying, then how many of these things are you doing? How well are you doing them? Timely thank you. The industry standard is 48 hours, and I know that can be really tough to do, but do you know what your average response time is? If you get a gift today, how soon does that donor get a thank you? Because I'm telling you, promptness really pays off. And if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or any longer than that, then I think that'd be an area that you could work on. So anyway, this is a great list to go back and look at what you're doing for stewardship, membership, and donors, I think, and use it as a tool for strengthening what you're already doing. Anything you want to add, Grace? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to a breakout.
I think just sometimes having a rule of thumb is helpful as a business. So in terms of working with any of our participants, we return every phone call within 1 business day. With our thank yous, we have guidelines for different amounts of giving. When I pick up the phone and make an immediate thank you call, plus send the thank you correspondence, which may be a day later, when I assign that to others to make that call.
Right.
and send out correspondence. So we have some guidelines that we all follow that keep these things on track.
Right. Well, that's a really good point. I'm a big believer in a written stewardship plan. It can certainly be part of the overall fundraising plan and or member retention plan. But I think having those benchmarks, which is what you're talking about, Grace, and these are our goals. This is when we're going to try to respond to these things. It does keep the trolley on the track. And, you know, the only other thing I want to add is I think, you know, how people are treated is the number one reason why they stay. I mean, think about your favorite coffee shop or your favorite hotel chain or any place that you go, not in a pandemic, but anything that you're doing where you choose to go back to that same restaurant, that same hair salon, that same whatever. It has a lot to do with how you're treated. And that's a big reason in why you stay and why you keep coming back. And I think the same applies to giving to your favorite cause. So let's do a breakout. So Carmen is going to help us with this. Here's what I'd like you to do when you get into the breakout. I want you to just discuss one way that you can improve your organization's donor retention rate and your first step to try to implement that strategy. If you would, once you're in your groups, we're going to try to put maybe 3 people. I don't know exactly how many will be in each group. Carmen's going to work the breakout magic on that. You'll notice in the bottom, and you guys have probably seen this if you've been on Zoom, that the breakouts are assigned a number. So pay attention, if you would, to the number of your group. And that way, when we come back and we're discussing it, I can call on different groups. And if you would, whoever's birthday is closest to today, if you will be the person responsible for reporting out for your group. So we're going to give you about 8 minutes. So hopefully that'll be enough for everybody in the group to talk about this and for you all to discuss it with each other. And then we'll come back and share what you all heard from your colleagues. Hello, welcome. So I'm really interested and eager to hear what you all have to say. I think we ended up with 4 groups, but maybe I don't know, I don't think there was folks not in one. Anyway, if you were in group 1, I'd love to hear from somebody in group 1.
Well, that was Hilda and Brennan. So,
okay.
Hilda, do you want to take the lead on this, or do you want me to?
I think you were taking some notes, so maybe that would be good.
I did, because she watched me, I guess.
Yes.
Great.
She didn't let me see her, but she watched me. We are kind of aligned in here. Hilda's with History Miami, and we both made the connection to donors. You know, so we during the pandemics, calling to see how they were,
Right.
and that needs. We've both talked about the fact that needs to continue as we go forward. That personal touch is so critical. Well, there's Hilda.
Yeah,
there it is.
And then they did some like a funders report, the impact of their time during the pandemic, and shared that out. And had gotten good response on that. And we do a quarterly newsletter for donors and sharing the good work. So you've got written words, you've got personal contact, and then she also does a members corner. I shared that we're reaching out. We were inviting members to our Zoom sessions, and people were participating because we pivoted and put everything online. And then now, a month ago, we started in-person sessions, inviting members to come to in-person sessions. And while a month ago, there were very few people, tonight we have 2 full sessions of in-person programming going on tonight. And Friday night, we've been almost sold out. So people have begun to trust us, so that I think all that personal engagement all along the lines has led us to this fact that people trust us. They've come in and see how we're operating, and they're coming back.
Right. Well, I love what you said about that they trust you now. I mean, let's if we can think back to what March was like, when all this stuff was new and everybody was getting on Zoom and people didn't know what to expect or how long it would take. And so as time has gone by, they've tested the waters, they've come to some of those things, and now they trust you. And on this side, you know, we're all getting better at this. I'm sure you guys are getting better at offering virtual programming and whatnot. I liked what you said about a funders report, and am seeing a lot of organizations do a good job of kind of presenting that information, one suggestion I would have is I've seen organizations call it an investment report, or sometimes a gratitude report, which both sound very externally focused. This is what the funders, the community, our donors, our members make possible, versus an annual report, which we all used to produce back in the day, which is really about, it's about us, about our organization. So all good, really good ideas that you guys are doing. Okay, group 2, thank you for sharing, and I love seeing your faces. Group 2, let's hear from group 2.
Skip room 2.
I'm sorry.
There wasn't.
That was the one that we moved
so
people around.
yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
so we will skip group 2 and go to, that was the no name, invisible group. Okay, group 3. Let's hear from group 3. If you designated a spokesperson, whoever's birthday was closest to today, or whoever's willing.
Mary or
to do it.
Melanie, do you want to, would you like to report?
I can go ahead and jump in. I'm sorry I don't have a webcam, so you don't get to see my face. But we talked about communication being so key. One of the things that we've been doing at the Flagler Museum is targeted mailings as we were closed and as we were reopening, just touching point with some of our key donors and letting them know what we've been up to, how excited we are to have them back. Kind of going with what Brennan was saying about building that trust. So that now that we start to do live programming, people feel up to date about, what we've been working on since we've closed and reopened.
Okay, good point. Anything else from that group? Grace, you were in that group.
I'll just share real quickly. There's a comment in chat that goes back to our discussion about reaching out to donors in response to contributions. So Brennan said, I agree on a plan for levels of donors, but each donor is an individual. A $100 donor may have donated consistently over the past decade and deserves a call, as well as that $500 donor who made an upgrade or a first gift. And I completely agree with that. So our levels, precipitating phone calls, simply determine who makes that call. So every donor and every member gets a call from us. But because I'm an executive director who's also the entire development department at our small museum, we have other ways and we engage other people in making those calls.
Yeah, and we're
getting those communications out. So.
Right, and we're going to talk more about that, I think, in a later slide. And Brennan, I think you bring up a really, really good point, and that is loyalty, right? Donor loyalty, member loyalty. I mean, it's the holy grail of fundraising, if you will. And I agree. If you've had somebody that has given $100 a year, every year, consistently for 4 years, 7 years, 9 years. I worked with a client one time that had someone who'd been making a monthly gift every month since 1991. And the flip side of that was nobody had ever met that person. So that's a whole nother long story on that. But I think donor loyalty is one of those things that we should be recognizing and tracking. And how great would it feel if you've been a long-standing donor to your favorite museum or organization in your community, and you got a call from the organization saying, Alice Lee, Brennan, we just want you to know, we know that you are a long-standing supporter of our organization. We notice and we appreciate it and we thank you. I think that would be awesome. So your point about recognizing tenure and loyalty in giving is just a really, really good point. Okay, let's hear from group 4.
Hi, this is Declan Sheehy. We had Jennifer DeHolland and Dan Ingram. We communicated by text because not everybody had cameras, but mostly agreeing with what the other folks have done. A combination of social media posts, thank you calls, much the same as Brennan working at the Bishop. We do social media. We invite our members to Zoom events. We send letters. We make phone calls, not just to major donors, but also to long-term donors. And we've also done some video segments just recently with the staff saying thank you for our donors. So.
Oh, so tell me a little bit more about that one, Declan. How did you do that?
Well, we just started it. The idea came from our community engagement, head of community engagement, to do staff thank you videos. So we did like 5 or 10 second sort of vignettes of, we filmed about 20 staff. We're going to do a whole series of just people saying thank you, because of you we can do what we do. So it was really about what the donation has meant to the museum.
I really love that. And one thing I think the pandemic has done and has created an opportunity, and this is an example of that, to let donors and members kind of see behind the curtain, where they're seeing the curators, they're seeing the staff that basically make their favorite place, their favorite museum, their favorite exhibit actually happen. So having the staff say, without you, we couldn't be doing what we're doing. I think that's a great idea and something that would be fairly easy to implement. So great. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you sharing ideas. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for all of that. Anybody else have a comment or anything in the chat, Grace, before I move on?
Nope.
Okay, great. Thanks again. Okay, well, let's do our third poll. And I want to get your feedback on board involvement. To what degree are board members involved in stewarding and stewardship of donor or member relationships? So give me your feedback. One person immediately answered, minimally involved. Okay, let's see what we got. I haven't seen any proactive responses yet. A few more. Thanks, everybody. A few more responses. Do, 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 do. Okay, almost got everybody.
All right.
Ready to close it
All right, we
out?
can go ahead. Yeah, we'll go ahead and close it out.
Okay. So basically the majority of you said minimally involved. A couple of you said somewhat involved. So thank you for sharing your feedback on that. At least nobody said not involved. That's good. But nobody also said proactively involved. And so I think a lot of the work that I do is about educating board members about how important they are in this process. So let's keep talking about this issue. And Grace, would you chime in on this? Because I know this is something that you feel strongly about and have had experience with.
Absolutely. Because we are small from a staff standpoint, we have always been very volunteer dependent. And so we have our board of directors and as many as 8 working committees in any given year. And within our board, we've created a board development team that assist with many of our development activities, especially in regard to stewardship and planning. So the first thing that is important to note for us is that you can't tell your board you're establishing this board development team, or that your board is suddenly doing board development and expect them all to do it. So I make an effort to get to know each and every board member well, and they typically have served in some other capacity as a volunteer at the museum before being asked to join the board, so that we understand their level of commitment. And so because we know them well, I seek those who love making phone calls, who love spending time talking to people, who love planning events, who love writing notes, who love running errands, people who just love those kinds of activities, because there are many people that hate making phone calls. Hate taking the time to talk to people. So you're seeking out the ones who have the aptitude or the interest, and then asking them to join individually, not cornering everybody in the scope of a larger board meeting. You can create awareness in a board meeting, but invite your board members to serve individually and make sure that they're comfortable with this, and do that with a board job description for this particular team, so they know what types of activities they'll be asked to do, how much time you're asking for on average on a weekly basis. If they're making phone calls, about how many calls a week are you going to ask for, but they know what they're getting into. And then with our phone calls, this team helps a lot with those entry-level phone calls, and they gather a lot of important information for us. So, for example, for a new member, the first question is always, how are you doing today? And let them talk, and you get to know people a lot better, especially right now with the pandemic. People love to talk right now. In the past, a lot of people hate phone calls because they feel like you're calling to solicit them. Right now, people welcome phone calls. They're lonely. They're not out and about as much. They love the opportunity to talk with someone. So how are you? And then we basically ask what motivated a new member to join our organization? What do they
Right.
value about us enough to join? And then we ask for any suggestions based on their initial experience with us. And I tell our members to make sure that when they make these calls, they have time for an open-ended conversation, because more of that information about our new member comes forth. And then, of course,
Right.
all of this is recorded in an email and sent back to staff to record in our CRM database, so
Right.
that is information that's gathered and not lost. And we've suddenly taken a step forward in that relationship from several standpoints.
That's great. And you're connecting the dots, right? By kind of remembering, oh, Alice Lee loves to make phone calls and Declan's happy to write notes. And you've got some of those things in there about what your board members like to do. And then you're learning new things about your members and recording that. That information doesn't get lost and disappear into the ether. I think a lot of organizations sometimes are really good about phone calls and those kinds of things, but then the information doesn't ever come back, you know, to the central hub, so to speak. And so it's a helpful exercise at the time, but then it doesn't produce any long-term results.
Right. Their relationship has to be with your organization, not with that one person or one staff member. You have to have that information available to everybody.
Yeah, which is a hard thing to do. I mean, people get to know you as the spokesperson and the staff leader, and they build rapport with you and you build rapport with them. But ultimately, you're also trying to build their connection and deepen their relationship with the organization and the mission, not just the person. I just think the point that you make here about asking people individually, I talk to boards about this all the time. They'll make an announcement at a board meeting. Okay, everybody, we need you to make your gift. Okay, everybody, we need you to sell your tickets. Okay, everybody, we need you to make some phone calls. And what happens is it's announced, but nobody really feels like they were individually asked to do it. So I think that's a really good point. So let's talk about some strategies to increase retention. We've talked about some of these already, reporting on outcomes. Here's what your gift made possible, even showing them that in the video with your staff. Here's where here's what you're making happen. We can't do it without you. I've already mentioned, promptness, thanking people having a system in place so that you're able to make those thank yous go out the door in a timely manner. Grace, do you want to say something about this segmentation and personalization? Because I know you've had good luck with that.
Absolutely. We have an annual giving program that started in 2008. So again, we're a very small organization. We've been growing over the years. And a few years ago, we started to do much more customized, segmented appeals. And that over just 2 years brought our annual giving program from a $40,000 program to over a $100,000 program. So taking that time to create an appropriate ask is well worth it. So,
right.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you said that and shared that. And I think that's good feedback for everybody. I know it can be challenging because this takes time to do that segmentation and personalization, especially if you're in a bigger market, a bigger museum, and you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of donors or members. How do you do that effectively? But the more you can do and the better job you can do of personalizing that. And we'll talk more about it as we go along, recognizing different groups of donors and where their relationship is with the organization and communicating with them differently. This is just a really good example of what the payoff is when you do that. And then I made the point about donor-centric content. That's about, in other words, that the donor, the member, is helping make things happen in the community and at your organization, as opposed to we're great, we're wonderful, and don't you want to support us? I'm also seeing a lot more organizations, a lot more of my clients that are surveying donors. So your point, Grace, about people are more receptive to the phone call because they're more isolated right now. The same is true, I think, with donor surveys. I've had clients do them via email. I've had a couple that have done some phone surveys. We're just surveying some of our donors and members and wanted to ask you a few questions, and people have been more open about doing that. So if you haven't ever surveyed your donors, why do you give? Why did you start giving? What do you like about our organization most? And those kinds of questions, it can be a great engagement activity. And of course, you would share those results back with all the people that agreed to participate. And I know you guys are good at sharing impact stories. And then the other one was about recurring gift options. And I'm seeing this also happening more frequently and getting more traction before the pandemic, which is the monthly giving, that I can send $10 a month rather than, stroking a check or debit, whatever, for a larger amount. So I want to spend some time, and I know Grace does too, on what you may be thinking right now, which is, okay, Alice-Lee and Grace, this all sounds wonderful, and I appreciate all these great ideas, and there's not enough hours in the day. So Grace, whether you're a small shop or you're a larger shop, there's still not enough hours in the day. So Grace, I know you want to really spend some time on this. See what I did there? What a bunch. Go ahead.
Well, I think I spoke to some of this earlier, but I would say in terms of time always being limited, you taking the time to step back and really assess how you're doing things can save you a lot of time. We mentioned a CRM database. A lot of small organizations don't use one or use an outdated one. And there are numerous fantastic lower priced tools that are cloud-based now that you can use. And if you bite the bullet and get all of your data moved into one of those, you will then realize so much efficiency and so much less error that moving forward, you'll be much more productive and save a lot of time. Another thing that you need to step back and take time to do is ask for help, as we just mentioned, with asking volunteers one-on-one to help with specific things, or building a team. That board development team I mentioned is also my sounding board for donor appreciation events or fundraising events, bouncing new ideas off of them, even a written appeal before it goes out. It's great to have a group of people. They're all members, they're all donors, they're all very dedicated to a part of our organization. They're all people I know well. They will speak up. To have somebody give me feedback before I send out those 500 appeals or whatever it is.
Right.
It's wonderful to have that kind of feedback and insight. So obviously setting priorities, but taking the time to step back to make your work more efficient and get help is probably my best recommendation. So.
Well, and I think it's a great suggestion. I'm working with an organization right now that just formed its first ever donor, what are they calling it? Their, well, basically it's their stewardship, donor relations, I think, the donor relations committee, that's what they're calling it. And they've never had one. They've never done anything like this. And in light of the pandemic and in light of how important that support is and the desire to let those donors really know how much their support is appreciated. And they had like 3 or 4 board members immediately, Grace, to your point, the ones who like making the calls and the notes or whatever, that said, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. So they're just getting it off the ground. And the first group that they are targeting, they managed to get their special event done like the very first part of March, right before the pandemic shut everything down. And so they want to reach back out to those folks, no ask, and just say thank you. Now they've been in touch since then, but they just want to do a round of calls to all of those sponsors. They have about, I think, 30 or 35 sponsors that they're going to do a round of calls from board members just to say thank you. How are you doing? How's your business? This is what's been happening in our organization. This is where your dollars have been going. And of course, they're setting the stage for wanting to ask them to renew that support for 2021. But right now, they're just going to do a thank you call. And then I knew of another group that's calling it their First Impressions Task Force, and they're targeting or focused on first-time donors and new people to the organization. So I just thought that was a good suggestion as well. Anybody else listening on the call or participating have a comment about this? Other ways that you're finding other ways you have found to stretch your time, especially for CEOs when there's not enough of you to go around. Anything else that you've done or tried that's really been helpful? We'd love to hear it. Feel free to drop it in the chat or take yourself off mute or raise your hand, whatever you want to do. So here's another approach that I wanted to share, and that is kind of coming up with that discipline of how we're going to do this. So this is something I really recommended pre-pandemic, and I really do think it still applies, which is I'm going to make some daily calls. I'm going to do weekly notes. And this used to be monthly visits. And of course, you guys are already doing monthly Zoom visits, and I think you can still do some of those visits via Zoom. And I want to encourage you to do that. I have one organization that has adopted Thank You Thursday. And so it started as something they were doing in their development program, that they were just going to kind of focus, okay, it's Thank You Thursday. So they put some social media posts out about it. Hey, it's Thank You Thursday. We just want to send a shout out to, and they'll thank donors or a sponsor or different partners and whatnot. And Thursday is the day that everybody kind of focuses on getting their thank yous done. And as a result of the development department doing it, now the volunteer department is doing it. And then the CEO also decided to do something for the staff on Thursdays as a Thank You Thursday. So I just throw that out. I mean, there's no magic to it. It's just a way of thinking about and focusing in, okay, this is the day I'm going to do it. And it's been very successful for this group. So I just wanted to share that idea. Any other comments or questions?
We have some in the chat, Alice Lee. So
okay, great.
Diane asked, how are the staff thank you videos that Declan spoke of being used and distributed? And Declan said, we are embedding the videos in an e-news sent out weekly. And then Brennan shared, they're also inviting donors who don't want to be exposed to any kind of crowd, special access at a time we're closed. And they love that special time.
Ooh, great idea, Brennan. Yes. And Declan, to your point, I've also seen organizations do this. If you have people that are giving online and they get an email back saying, oh, kind of either auto-generated or something you all send, thank you so much, we got your gift. I've had some clients that have included that thank you as embedded in that email thank you. So they get the message, thank you so much for your gift, blah, blah, blah. And here's a little thank you from our team. And then they click on it and then they get the little 27-second thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So that's another way to use it once you produce it, in addition to putting it in the e-newsletter. So really good suggestions. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about, we've been talking about some of these things, and sometimes I think the terms stewardship, appreciation, I think all these things, sometimes they get used interchangeably. And in my way of thinking, these four things are all different, and they are all what donors deserve. So the first one is acknowledgement. So my thoughts about acknowledgement are that this is kind of the minimum, right? This is, we're going to acknowledge that we received your gift, or acknowledge that you renewed your membership, and communicate with you. And I think of acknowledgement kind of as cake. So then appreciation. Well, what's appreciation? Well, I think appreciation are the notes and the phone calls and the things that you're doing above and beyond that become the icing on the cake. I think recognition is interesting, because most people think of recognition as public. So we're going to put your name on the donor list. We're going to put your logo on something. We're going to put your name in the 24 font instead of the 12 font. I mean, things that you do to recognize people publicly. But there's also private recognition. So Brennan, that example that you shared about opening the museum at special times just for that small group. I mean, not only is that stewardship, but it's a form of recognition. We see you and we recognize you as an important part of this organization. So don't forget about kind of those private ways of recognizing people. And then of course, the last one is stewardship, which I think is all of these things plus reporting on results before you ask again. So that example I just shared of the client that's going to do a round of calls now for gifts that came in March, they're going to do that now prior to going back to them. Make sure they know how much their gift has made a difference and what they've done with those dollars. So reporting on results before you ask again. We want to give you all some time to talk about this in a breakout. And of these 4, maybe which one is your leakiest strategy and ways that you are improving that. So Carmen, if you can help, we'll get everybody in groups, and looking at the time, I think I'm just going to do let's do about 6 minutes this time.
Okay. And we're just going to do 2 rooms so that we can gather them together a little bit better.
Okay, great. So you'll have just about 5 or 6 minutes to talk about this among your peers, and we look forward to hearing back from you in about 6 minutes. Okay, now that we got everybody. So anybody in group 1, I'd love to hear your best idea you heard in your discussion about how to improve your leakiest strategy. Anybody have a great one?
I think Hilda was going to share on our behalf.
Oh,
Hilda,
great.
do you wanna-
Oh, we're already at group 2? Okay, hold on. Yeah, what we talked about was sometimes being on a hamster wheel and not being able to take that time that we need to do to reach out personally to our donors, our members.
Yeah.
I know that I was saying that what would happen is you would have, you have the task, okay, I'm going to call these people, and then you get an urgent need that has to be taken care of, like right now, it's due tomorrow. So
Absolutely.
And then you put it off and you put it off, and then you kind of, push it to the side, and it becomes unmanageable later. So what we were just talking about was the fact that you really need to dedicate a certain time in your day and make those phone calls, not squish it between tasks like I was doing before.
Right.
When we made our calls, I had like 300 calls to make. So I broke out every day an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours sometimes, just to make the phone calls, because otherwise that was daunting.
I'll bet it was. But I love that idea of a certain time of day. It's kind of like the Thank You Thursday idea, that was a certain day of the week. Same concept.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple of colleagues, EDs, share that I know one in particular, she always makes her calls at the end of the day. And she said it's a great way to end the day, because people, if you reach them, they're really pleased to get the call and kind of end the day feeling good. So she always says that at the end of the day. I have another colleague, executive director, that likes to make her calls on Saturday mornings.
Oh,
and
really?
She said people are really impressed that they get a call on Saturday. I know some that wouldn't want to do that, but for her, Saturday morning is just a good time for her to do it, and people really appreciate it. So I think that's a really great suggestion. Hilda is, putting it on your calendar in a dedicated time. Thank you for sharing that. Group 2, I'd love to hear a great takeaway from group 2. Best idea you heard? Anybody?
All right. Declan or Mary, anything we talked about a bunch of things. So we also talked about being short-staffed. It's hard to, maybe we need to reprioritize how we thank people. It may take a little longer to get that letter out, but do it like Grace talked about, phone call first, or that email first, and then a call. People respond, love to hear. Messages are good, even if you can't reach the people.
Yeah,
I agree.
That kind of thing. Anything else, Declan? Or you're muted, Declan. He's right down the hall from me. I can go down and knock on his door.
Right. Well, and I want to comment on something you said about leaving a message. Even if you can leave a message, people appreciate it. They get the message.
Sure do.
Yeah, and they're glad to, I got a message from the museum. How great was that? Or from the Art Institute, whatever. Really great.
Declan's had great success in leaving messages, just reminding people we had a campaign. We just finished an annual appeal that was extremely successful, and he followed up on a lot of calls, and you can share, Declan, what happened.
Yeah, I was relieved that the frustration of not being able to reach somebody at least resulted in a gift. So that was positive and happened a couple of times. So it really reiterated that leave an upbeat message of what you're doing and why you're asking and why you're calling.
Right.
And I find sometimes with phone calls, it's so easy to pick up the phone and call. Sometimes we overthink it. We overthink what we're going to say if we get to talk to the person. And oftentimes if they do pick up and you say, hello, I'm calling from the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature, and I'm calling to say thank you, that's almost all you need to say.
Yep.
So don't overthink it. With one of the things that Bernan said, which is very, very important in terms of thanking people quickly. You can make a phone call a lot faster than you can write a letter because we have a process. It takes a week, blah, 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 blah. Everybody has a different process. And also, if you see an email come in with a gift, you can reach back out really quickly and say, hey, thank you. And we're having an event 2 weeks from tonight. Love you to come as my guest, either virtually or in person. Have a great day. Bye. Takes you, less than a minute, means the world.
I love the two things you said that I really, really love is number one, don't overthink it. And number two, just that quick, I saw your, shoot out the email or make the quick call and then they get a follow-up. So now the letter becomes icing on the cake because they've already gotten some cake.
Right.
Because you responded so quickly. So that's really great. Okay. I see we're in about the last 10 minutes of the class. So I want to keep rolling. And this is something that I know Grace really wants to talk about. This is super interesting from the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Go ahead, Grace.
Okay, so this is an article that I'll paste the link into the chat shortly. The article was called Membership Isn't the Top of the Mountain. It was by Eric Bruce, Head of Visitor Experience at the Minneapolis Institute of Art in 2017. And he was conducting experiments during their Guillermo del Toro at Home with Monsters exhibition, which was an exhibition that was very non-traditional, very appealing to a more general audience, not as much of a focused art audience. And their goal was to attract a large number of participants, that's what they expected, and to convert them into members. And so they developed new members only opportunities, special event privileges, advanced ticket buyer offerings. They ended up converting 11% of visitors into members. So they had 8,000 new members from their efforts. But then he took that a step further and said, well, gosh, what happens now? How do we retain these members? How do we maintain this momentum that we've got? Because it's very common in the arts and cultural sector that you have these peaks and valleys in membership coinciding with your blockbuster exhibition or event and this high attrition that follows, which we've recently experienced. So they invested in an improved ticketing system that ties directly into their CRM. And they developed a 12-month strategy for communicating specifically with all of those new members, doing focus groups, doing A/B testing with different communications and appeals. They established, and I love this, they established an MIA perks program. So they incentivize participation. So their new members earn points for engaging with different things that they were offering, and then they would get various perks for that. And it was a way to increase participation to deepen their relationship with their members. And then they took it a step farther and they also established a free membership level. So this free level had benefits that were less than the first paid level. And that, of course, was the cost of acquiring your participants' information. So they thought that lost revenue in terms of that admission was worth it because now they had the contact information for those participants that were interested enough to come out once. And then they had various initiatives in place to encourage repeat participation and build on that over time and try to build a relationship and some loyalty. So this graphic I love because it divides participation into these 4 different groups and it identifies what the participant wants, what your organization wants, and what you offer to make those 2 things come together. I think it's just brilliant. So just going through some of it in terms of awareness, they need the information, their participant, they want something to do, they want a great experience. We want to grab their attention and set the stage for a positive outcome by having appropriate expectations. We want to prompt a visit. In terms of the attraction level, people want an easy, affordable, and memorable experience. We want to collect data to build a profile. That's where their free memberships came in. We want to grow earned revenue. We want to offer exceptional service, so maybe they'll come back. You get to the attachment phase where now they're a paid member or maybe an entry-level donor, and then the participant wants personalization. They want to be known as an individual. Brenan mentioned recognizing people as individuals earlier. They want to make something better, their community, people's lives. They want their sense of self reinforced through their engagement with the organization. We want to know what their core motivations are so we can connect with them. We want to be able to solicit support. We want to be able to develop brand loyalty. And then you get onto allegiance. And of course, that level is your top donor level. People are part of something really important. They're engaging their family and friends and so on. So it would be interesting to, and I haven't had a chance to do this yet, to adapt this to your own organizations, because it really will direct your strategies, your program decisions, your messaging, your priorities, your choices about how to interact with people on all these different levels. So I just.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. I couldn't agree more. I think this is really, really well done. And I just like the whole thought, that this is a journey from first time donor to, loyal, right? To I'm totally in love. I'm just connected to this organization. This is one of my organizations that I always support. And the strategy and the thought that goes into moving them from here to there. So we're going to drop the link to the full article, and there's some other graphs and charts along with this one that we both thought would be super helpful. And I think it also brings out the point. I want to move on to this next slide because we're going to be wrapping it up here in just a few minutes. All donors are not created equal, and yet they all want you to show me that you know me. And that kind of goes back, I'll back up a little bit, that attachment, the show me that you know me, that I'm a member feeling. And so when we were talking earlier about the things that we do to retain donors or retain members, and I just use donors in this example, is that we tend to, out of a need for time management and whatnot, is to just treat all donors the same. And yet, if I am a first-time donor to your organization, the kind of letter I would get and what you would say to me and what you might tell me about the organization or how my gift is making a difference when I've never given before should sound and look and feel a lot different than if I'm a longtime supporter and a longtime member and I've been giving for years, or if I've made 2 or 3 gifts since January or whatnot. And I shouldn't be getting the same hello, welcome, and thank you, the kind of letters that we tend to send to first-time donors, which I'm also a big advocate for writing a thank you letter like you're writing it to your favorite aunt or your best friend. A warm letter, welcoming people, thanking people, and whatnot. So this is another way to look at what you're doing in your shops and decide, well, maybe our bucket is pretty solid on the major donor and corporate donor and sponsor piece, but maybe our bucket starts to get a little leaky, either in the first time donor category or maybe in loyal donors. You're not really looking at that, or the one-time donor that kind of comes and goes. And as Grace said, I know in a lot of organizations, you do a blockbuster exhibit and people join to get the benefits for that, and then they kind of fritter away. And so I think the challenge, of course, is how to recognizing that those relationships are all different. And as a result, the way that you engage with them, the tone and tenor and even content of the thank you letter would look and sound different depending on which category they're in. So that maybe put a little circle around it, homework around that one as a way to something to think about and maybe talk with your staff and your team about after today. So as we wrap up, as Grace and I were prepping for today, one of the things that she brought up is pandemic exhaustion. And I hear this a lot. I mean, I work with executive directors all the time, and I am concerned about this. I am concerned about you all and your ability to keep yourself sane and your energy levels high. So Grace, you want to chime in and say a few words about this?
Yeah, I would just say, so a lot of us are telecommuting more, and I've found that it's easy to work more when you're telecommuting because you don't have to get in the car to go someplace. So, 9-hour days have turned into 11-hour days. You have to make time for yourself. You have to set limits on your work time. You have to set priorities. You have to figure out what can be pushed back because we can't tackle everything. I've found time more limited in the pandemic because we're not on the hamster wheel as a well-oiled machine cranking out what we know how to do. We are reinventing almost everything, and that takes time to do that thoughtfully. So I'd be curious to hear what others do for self-preservation. For me, it's a matter of asking for help, setting limits, and deciding what can wait, and setting priorities. But anyone else want to chime in on self-preservation strategies in a pandemic?
Well, I've had to force myself to quit when it's 5:30, as opposed to it's 6:30, 7:30. Check your email. It's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, just in case. That it's right there. And sometimes you just figure, well, if I look at it tonight, I'll be ready for it in the morning. And I have to stop myself from doing that. I still do it, but not as much as I did at the beginning.
But then maybe your work is not as effective the next day or the day after because you start to get fatigued.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, and Grace, I think your point about that you're reinventing everything.
Yes.
And so, which is exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And, I go back to the highest and best use. I mean, especially when you're the CEO, executive director, you are the face of the organization, and there's got to be a highest and best use of your time. What can Grace do and Brianne do and Hilda do that only you can do, and things that other people could do. And having board members or volunteers or people that you can, move some of those things to. And I know there's lots of things that really only you can do and whatnot, but I do think self-care and self-preservation, is really important. I don't think the world's going to turn back to the way it was anytime soon. And I'm also concerned about what 2021 is going to look like, because the impacts of what's happened in 2020, I think we're going to see really see in full force in 2021. So taking care of yourselves. Anybody else have a comment or a question or anything in the chat, Grace, that we haven't addressed?
We have just thank you, Alice, Lee, and Grace and Fam. This was a great session, and thank you all for a great presentation, much appreciated. And one suggestion, try to end the day with a positive donor call was another suggestion.
Yes.
And, I just want to say thank you all for being on the session and on the conversation.
Yes. Well, and I like that idea. And when I mentioned that about ending your call, you're ending your day with a call to say thank you. Ending your day on something positive is an important thing. So to that note, I will share my favorite fundraising joke. You may have heard it, but it's still my favorite. So here we go. A doctor, a lawyer, and a fundraiser all die and go to heaven. And St. Peter is there to welcome them. And St. Peter says, welcome to heaven. I'll grant you one wish. And the doctor says, well, I'd like $1 million. And St. Peter says, okay, here you go. $1 million. Welcome to heaven. Come on in. So the lawyer steps forward and she says, well, I'd like $1 billion. And St. Peter says, okay, here you go. $1 billion. Come on in. Welcome to heaven. So the fundraiser steps forward and St. Peter says, welcome to heaven. I'll grant you one wish. And the fundraiser says, can I just have the business cards of the 2 people who came in ahead of me?
Nice.
Thanks, everybody. I hope this was helpful.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice Lee. I just want to remind everybody, this is Carmen, that you will be getting a survey that will come your way through email. So please take a look at that. Also, check out our website, flamuseums.org, for upcoming programs, or both Twitter and Facebook. Our handles are FLA Museums. Here are some upcoming programs that we have that we'd like to share with you. And I just want to thank our speakers again, Alice Lee and Grace. Thank you so much for sharing such a wealth of knowledge with us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.